got a chance to interview him afterwards, and I asked him about what he was talking about here. What are the sort of laws that are included in this dashboard that he wants to see repealed? This is one of his answers.
Well, there was one we were discussing earlier, which is, in and of itself, completely trivial, but there is a law that requires in tunnels, so if you go through the Dartford Tunnel, there have to be signs saying how you get out of it every 25 metres. But in this country we use yards for road signs, so the signs say 121 yards in one direction and 1152 yards in the other. We've got very funny numbers, and this is all because of an EU regulation hitting UK law and coming up with an odd answer. But this isn't the only one. There are, when you look through it, the amount of things we regulate, the detail of things that we regulate, you ask, why are we doing that? If equipment is safe and works, why does it need a product-specific regulation?
So he knew that you were going to be interviewing him about this?
Yes.
So he had sort of fair warning that he was going to be given an opportunity to come up with an absolute humdinger of a law that everybody listening to this programme would be desperate to repeal.
Mm-hmm. And that was his answer.
And this, should we hear it again?
If you'd like to.
You're not used to this. You're a proper grown-up. So this is the Minister for Brexit Opportunities, presented, and I mean no criticism by this, with an open goal by Rachel Venables, an opportunity to absolutely do a lap of honour going, ha-ha, I remember that O'Brien bloke asking people what laws they wanted to get rid of and thinking he was so clever because they couldn't think of any. Well, I've got one. I'm the Minister for Brexit Opportunities. I've been through all of them, and this is the best that I could find.
Well, there was one we were discussing earlier, which is, in and of itself, completely trivial, but there is a law that requires in tunnels, so if you go through the Dartford Tunnel, there have to be signs saying how you get out of it every 25 metres. But in this country we use yards for road signs, so the signs say 121 yards in one direction and 1152 yards in the other.
Perhaps I'm being unkind, Rachel. Is there more to this story than meets the eye?
So two things I think I should stress. First of all, his answer, as he acknowledged, and he acknowledged throughout the interview, he's talking here about lots of tiny incremental changes. So he's not saying that it starts and ends at the Dartford crossing and the signs on the walls, but that there are loads, thousands, he believes, of small changes that will have a big impact. As for the Dartford crossing itself, this was actually quite interesting to me. My in-laws live in Kent, and I have often wondered as I've driven through the Dartford crossing why the numbers. So you get emergency exit signs that will say things like 137 yards to the exit, and you think, why isn't this in 10 or 5 numbers? As he explained, it's because the EU says they have to be at a maximum of every 25 metres. We chose to make it a maximum of 25 metres, but we have all road signs in yards. So we could have had more signs that every 20 yards or 10 yards said...
So it was our decision to do it in the way that he described.
Yeah, which is interesting. And he acknowledged, when we chatted about it around the interview, he did acknowledge that. But this is just one of the sorts of things, cutting Brexit red tape, that he sees as being a major benefit.
Okay.
And there were other issues as well, there were other topics.
You're allowed to drive a horse and carriage through the Dartford Tunnel. I'm just wondering if he's ever been there.
I don't know.
Carry on.
I'd imagine, what's the speed limit? 30? Maybe you could.
Yeah.
Anyway, so onto a more serious topic. As I mentioned, we did this interview on Wednesday. Inflation that day hit 9.1%. We know the cost of living crisis is a real serious issue for huge swathes of the population. So I asked him if truly these little by little, small incremental measures were really enough to help people. As people out there who are in full-time work have to go to food banks, have to struggle to count the pennies every month to pay their soaring energy bills, do you think they're really going to care about whether or not a vacuum cleaner is a certain wattage or whether or not sparkling wine can be served in a plastic bottle?
You're absolutely right that people will be interested in some things that we've done for the 1st of July, so that there was going to be an extra cost to fish fingers because of the way they are imported. That's a 2% increase that has been avoided. There was going to be up to 70% increase in the cost of some cheeses coming in. That we've avoided by using our Brexit freedoms. So there are savings to be had. But
is that the best you can do, cheese and fish fingers?
I'm just giving you examples of savings, but dare I say, you're slightly missing the point, because the point is that this is the aggregation of lots and lots of small savings. And when you talk of vacuum cleaners, you want to, when you have to buy a new vacuum cleaner, to buy one that is the most cost effective and that does the job best. Now, that may be an American vacuum cleaner, it may be a South Korean vacuum cleaner, which under EU rules we can't import at the moment. So getting value for money means opening yourself up to global markets.
What about the risk of deregulation going too far? How can you guarantee that the cutting of this red tape won't open consumers up to real safety and health risks?
Because this is about protecting consumers as well, and there's democratic accountability. So your viewers and listeners will be aware of where they think they ought to be protected and will be able to directly contact their MPs, because we are now in charge of our own regulatory systems rather than it being delegated to a bureaucracy that can't be changed by our own democratic efforts.
Okay. Again, this is the man charged with coming up 6 years after the event with all the reasons why Brexit is a brilliant idea. And if I may say so, you may be rather missing the point, is possibly not the accusation that should have been levelled at you, because this is as good as it gets. And we had calls from people who work with electrical appliances and are familiar with the vacuum cleaner legislation, who were adamant that there is no benefit whatsoever to be gained from changing these particular rules.
Well, I think this is a big part of the issues, and my questioning at the end, I think I felt like I had to get that in about removing red tape, removing regulation. I mean, you and I have talked about the ramifications for Grenfell when it came to David Cameron's so-called bonfire of red tape. But even there was a point at the start of that where I asked him, he kept talking about how the EU says we can't serve sparkling wine in plastic bottles. And while he admitted he's not particularly keen on drinking sparkling wine out of plastic bottles, he'd like the chance. The Independent actually then went away and looked into it, and it seems that the Wine and Spirits Trade Association have reacted rather alarmingly with the idea of sparkling wine in plastic bottles, because it's a real health risk. The amount of pressure that goes into those...
I made ginger beer once in a plastic bottle.
How did that go?
Absolutely wrecked my mother's airing cupboard. I've never been in so much trouble, apart from the time I accidentally set fire to the chip pan. Did you know that sparkling wine contains roughly the same pressure as the tyre of a large van?
Exactly. So, you know, these regulations, and there will be regulations out there, I have no doubt that many people listening will say, well, that particular one, if they removed that, that would make my industry better, more efficient. But there'll be other people saying, yeah, but if you remove that, does it make us any safer? Probably not. And, you know, this is a hugely complex issue here. Each individual law of those 2,400 need a lot of scrutiny before we do go to repeal any of them.
We've had 6 years to scrutinise them. Forgive me, that's not your responsibility. We might straddle the news. Are you comfortable straddling the news?
Absolutely,
we'll come back after the news, because you've got one more clip to play. The fish finger thing, was that the biosecurity stuff that reduced? Do we know? What's he talking about there?
He's talking about...
so these, just to be clear, these wouldn't be British fish fingers, would they, if they're being imported? So they are, by definition, unhappy fish fingers.
As I understand it, there would have been a 2% increase on fish fingers from the 1st of July. So this is an increase that has been avoided. Similarly, a 70% increase.
But has it been avoided by not observing biosecurity rules that we had to obey I mean, I don't think he knows, so I don't know why I'm expecting you to know. And of course, only British fish can be happy fish, so he's now flogging unhappy fish fingers, or fingers of unhappy fish. And the cheese bit, 70%?
70% as part of the same one. So that was his sort of answer to the cost of living. And it was on the day, which we'll discuss, I think, after the news. Yes. It was on the same day that, a really alarming report said that the average worker in Britain is set to lose hundreds of pounds in pay every year by 2030 because of Brexit.
I have a theory that whenever he is feeling particularly stupid, he says, I think you may be missing the point. I think that's like a tactic that he's developed over the years. But of course, to paraphrase the great sage of our times, Joey Tribbiani, could he be? Oh no, that's Chandler Bing, isn't it?
That's Chandler.
Yeah, that was close. Could he be any more patronising? It is 3 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on at LBC, where Jacob Rees-Mogg's latest contributions to the public pageant include a suggestion that he has somehow managed to keep down the price of fish fingers, albeit that the fingers are made of fish which isn't British, and therefore, according to his own ludicrous worldview, could not possibly be happy. And he thinks it would be a good idea to let the UK drinks industry sell sparkling wine in plastic bottles, despite the fact that the UK drinks industry thinks that this is absolutely bonkers for the relatively straightforward reason that sparkling wine contains roughly the same pressure as the tyre of a large van. And that's why you were right, Rachel Venables, to pick up on the tension between health and safety and deregulation. And quite right, of course, to cite Grenfell Tower, which Jacob Rees-Mogg felt only caused 72 deaths because the victims lacked common sense. But it's the cost of living crisis, I think, that you moved on to next.
Yeah, so the final clip from Jacob Rees-Mogg talks about the cost that Brexit is going to have on everyday men and women. And this is because the Resolution Foundation think tank and academics from the London School of Economics, on the day that I interviewed Jacob Rees-Mogg on Wednesday, said that the average worker in Britain would be losing roughly £470 in pay every year by 2030. That was compared, they said, based on their data, with a Remain vote in 2016. They talked about higher import costs, adding pain to household finances, and a labour productivity being reduced by roughly 1.3%. So I put this to him. So did the journalists who attended a lobby briefing with him after he spoke to the House of Commons. And he outright, again and again, dismissed this as just a reincarnation of Project Fear. He said that the Resolution Foundation were made up of people who supported the EU and that he wasn't paying any attention to it. And he also very interestingly said that the government wouldn't be conducting any research of their own to actually fact check it, to make sure that these figures, these alarming figures, weren't accurate. Has the government done any projections of its own about the impact of Brexit to counter what the Resolution Foundation are saying?
No, I'm not in favour of doing these spurious calculations because I don't think they've got anywhere. Lots of people have done them. They've all been pointless.
Do you not think the government should know, should care enough about the public purse, the public finances, to check on these sorts of things so that we can guard against it if it is true?
Dare I say you say no? Now, the word no is very important because producing these reports does not mean you know. They are fundamentally speculative. They don't know. Has the OBR, in all its existence, the Office of Budget Responsibility, ever come up with a report on the future of the economy that has turned out to be right? To which the answer is no, it hasn't. So I have very little time for spurious exercises in forecasting. The long-range weather forecasts are accurate compared to this type of approach.
I mean, what will the government be deploying then to measure whether or not Brexit is going well rather than it will going well? Because I think I read this week that they're not doing any sort of tracking either. They're not commenting on whether damage to the economic performance, as described, not predicted by the Bank of England and attributed to Brexit. They're not doing anything then to prove that it's going well or badly.
That was certainly the implication we got from his answer there. I mean, what he kept stressing was, there is no way of solidly and definitely measuring what has happened compared to what would have happened. There is no way of knowing, had we voted to stay in, what would have happened. The job of the OBR is to
point the direction of traffic, not to give you the, pound, shilling and pence description of exactly where things will be. The whole budget depends upon the worker. I know he knows this and I know you know this, but some of the people listening, mate, well, I know you know this. Questionable whether he knows this, but entire budgets are built upon forecasts and predictions. He's essentially saying there's no point having budgets when he says there's no point having forecasts and predictions. Essentially, yes.
And well, what he's saying is he doesn't want to see forecasts. There's no point in forecasts because there's no way of knowing, and he's pointed to in the past forecasts being wrong. And of course, Project Fear, in his terminology, predicted really the sky would fall in the day after Brexit, and that didn't happen. We didn't immediately plunge into a recession. And I think those sorts of arguments have really bolstered his side when it comes to dismissing reports and surveys like this. They can also talk about COVID, they can talk about Ukraine, and they can say, the economic shock we're seeing from there. There is no way of knowing how much or otherwise of it is down to Brexit. Obviously, other people would argue the exact opposite, but this is the issue that we're at here.
That's not even how forecasts work, as Julie points out. But I suppose we are where we are. So when are we expecting the results? Do we know? I mean, also, next time you see him, if you're allowed to interview him again, this is what you need to say. You need to say, With respect, I think you may be rather missing the point, because vacuum cleaners manufactured in the United States are 110 volts and 60 hertz, and so not usable in the UK, while South Korean vacuum cleaners use 220 volts and 60 hertz, so would not function properly. The manufacturers you refer to would have to manufacture a 230 volt 50 hertz model for the UK market, and there is currently no reasonable reason why anyone in the vacuum cleaner manufacturing business in America would want to do that. For the very vague prospect of someone in the UK wanting to buy one of those vacuum cleaners.
Have you got that written down?
Of course.
I'll take a copy
You're
of it.
You're very welcome. Rachel Venables, many thanks. Do we know what your new job title is yet?
No.
Rachel Venables is the Don, the doyenne.
I'll take that.
Yes, exactly.
Take that all the way to the bank.
LBC's doyenne, and has recently been promoted to an as yet unspecified position, which is what we are somewhat nichely referring to there. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Go on then. We should try and get hold of Simon Spurrell, our cheese fella, shouldn't we? We've got Daniel Lambert, who does the wine, and Simon Spurrell, who does the cheese. He might be able to explain the cheese story to us, so we'll try and do that. In the meantime, I'm going to let myself off the leash a bit today. I've got something quite important to do at 12:30. There is a memorial service for the 6 Royal Military policemen who were killed in Iraq 19 years ago today, and we're going to cross there, speak to one of their comrades, and indeed to a lovely bloke who has taken personal responsibility for looking after the memorial garden. That service is unfolding while we speak, so I'm keen to catch up with them, but I'm going to let myself have a Brexit phone-in. I went a bit kiddie then, didn't I? I went a bit kiddie instead. I'm going to have a Brexit phone-in. I'm going to let myself have a Brexit phone-in, and I think I'm going to ask you the question that's popped up like a sort of whack-a-mole throughout this morning's proceedings. And that question is this. Are you ready? Is the dam beginning to break where you are? So the Labour Party can't move on this until it's not even an argument anymore. There's a day that was always going to dawn. The only question was when. And I don't know whether Ukraine and COVID have postponed the realisation, or whether they have hastened it, or whether they've had no impact upon it at all. Ed points out, are you really telling me that my children's futures have been jeopardised so that Jacob Rees' dog, what he described as make-up greased dog, can line up fish fingers in metres in the Dartford Tunnel? Pretty much, Ed, yeah, that was pretty much the gist of it. So the Labour Party can't move on this. Whether or not they should, I do not know. But they can't move on this until it is no longer even debatable, until it is no longer possible to point at Brexit and say, they want to reverse it. And everyone else goes, yeah, of course they flipping do. They're sane. So I'm not having a beef at them yet. There may be a day for that beef to come. I'm just talking about the dam. And listen, you can't be me. You can't be like me to do this. You can't be a fully paid up member of the Ramona Metropolitan Elite. The only way we can, because we are not part of the dam. The dam is made of what Charles Dickens referred to as gammon. It's a gammon dam. And whether or not that is going to break depends upon the parts of the dam that are not gammon, the parts that are not thick and silly, all of the people who voted for Brexit in good faith, not in order to harm foreigners or to secure bogus sovereignty. Do you see what I mean? The people who honestly thought, for example, there'd be 350 million quid a week for the NHS as a direct consequence of Brexit. The people who honestly thought, for example, that there would be an increase in our standard of living, that there'd be wage increases across the board, that food would become cheaper, that fuel would become cheaper. Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, promised both of those, cheaper fuel and cheaper food. So those votes, because I've said a million times that not everybody who voted for Brexit was a daft racist, all right? Every daft racist I've ever met, either on air or off air, had voted for Brexit. But those are two very, very, very different propositions. And I don't allow myself to do this very often because it gets my hopes up. And it's the hope that gets you. The disappointment I can cope with. It's the hope that gets you. But is the dam beginning to break? I think back to Liz in Cricklade, who was canvassing in Honiton and Tiverton this very week and dealing with a disaffected Tory voter, a disaffected former Boris Johnson supporter, who talked about how I could not possibly vote for Boris Johnson because he is such a liar, and then added, unprompted, and I voted for Brexit as well. And then paused, and the way Liz in Cricklade told the story, it was as if you could see the scales falling from his eyes in real time. He went, that was a massive lie too, wasn't it? So here we are, talking about fish fingers and selling sparkling wine in plastic bottles when it was supposed to be a return to the imperial glories of the 19th century or something. I don't even know what. How would you know? Listen, people, I don't know if people are going to ring in and say, no, the dam isn't breaking, but I'd really like you to. This is going exactly as I planned. I knew exactly what I was voting for, and this is it. Fish fingers and plastic wine bottles, 0345 6060 973, and not having to live under a disgusting tyranny where all phones use the same charger. I demand the right to rifle through the odds and ends drawer in the kitchen, desperately trying to find a charger that works on my phone because all of the other ones in the house don't. Do you see what I mean? Is the dam on, as you might say? Is it beginning to, and indeed as lots of you have said, although I think Robin Devon was first, is it beginning to break? I'm pretty sure it is. In fact, let's say it is beginning to break, because even if it takes ages, it starts breaking, doesn't it? The little spurts of water that come jetting out through cracks and fissures. Is that the right word? Fissures? Fissures? I think it is. The little spurts of water that they are now emerging. You're seeing it. We probably get more of them on this show than anywhere else in the country. So is it growing? Describe to me your fissure. On 0345 6060 973, phone me with your spurts and tell me why you think you are part of the process of the dam now breaking, the Brexit dam. And we won't mention gammon again because all of the very tough free speech champions get very, very upset when we use that word, and we don't like to cause unnecessary upset, except very, very occasionally. So we won't use that word again, or we'll try not to, but we will ask this question: is the dam beginning to break? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And if so, point me towards your spurts. It is 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are examining the dam and wondering where the water is coming from. I speak, of course, about Brexit and the dam that has held back the truth and the reality of European Union membership for the best part of 6 years. My spurts today would involve Jacob Rees-Mogg being reduced this week to talking about phone chargers, plastic sparkling wine bottles and fish fingers, when they were supposed to be talking about, world-beating enhancements of our trade. And, well, you remember what we were supposed to be talking about. It's sad sometimes to recall, isn't it? Josh is in Wolverhampton. Josh, what have you got?
Hi, James. How are you?
Pretty good, Josh. What's on your mind?
I think Labour could start talking about Brexit if they were sensible with it. They could label everything that's going wrong that would have always gone wrong as Boris Johnson's Brexit, haulage issues, Boris Johnson's Brexit, food prices, Boris Johnson's Brexit. They could say all the things that are causing issues for people are at the door of Boris Johnson. Obviously, this would have.
But they're not, though, are they?
Regardless.
You know that. I don't think it. Well, I'm going to have a little argument with you about this, but a friendly one, because it's not Boris Johnson's Brexit. It's Brexit, so they can try and pin it on him. But you're suggesting they can do that without calling Brexit into question.
But the only reason they would need to blame Johnson is because Johnson is the person that they are trying to hopefully defeat soon. So if it was anybody else, they could have blamed them. Yes, it was Theresa May's Brexit or David Cameron's Brexit in a sense, because he was the person that put us in this beginning of this position. But I think they could start to talk about it. Unfortunately, I don't think they will, because they've, as you mentioned, David Lammy saying things about not returning to situations that we were in previously. But I think they could, without then having the response of, you just want us to rejoin, typical Ramonas, blah-de-blah. There's no real answer back. If you're saying it's Boris Johnson's fault, this Brexit is terrible, there isn't really I don't know how Johnson would react to that at PMQs. He doesn't like being labelled the person that's caused an issue. He doesn't like embarrassment. He doesn't like things being put on him. And in terms of, you mentioned, is the dam breaking? I live in the West Midlands. I work in the manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, the dam isn't really breaking. People are very much aware of the fact that Brexit is rubbish.
Yeah.
But I think there's too many reasons that have been able to be blamed for that.
But that's why Starmer can't move. I think you're arguing yourself out of your original point there, Josh.
Probably does happen a lot.
Same here, mate. Same here. So that's the point, isn't it? And he has to wait until it's not an argument anymore, until it's just blindingly obvious, until people's faces are right up against it. We shall see. Lovely call. Staying in the West Midlands, I think, Josh. Thank you. We go to Bromyard, where Rob is. Rob, what would you like to say?
Well, hi, James.
Hello.
I travelled back from Poland last night after having been there working. Thank you very much. Great to be back. If you'd been in passport control in the UK passport holder line, you would have been left in no doubt about just how rubbish people think the Brexit effects have been.
This is the freedom of movement element.
Kick off.
This is the freedom of movement element of it. And are people ready to accept that this is a direct consequence of what they possibly voted for, or are they still susceptible to the idea that it's all Johnny Foreigner's fault, or that we're the real victims here?
The people that were in front of me turned round and said, "Christ, I wish I'd had a Polish passport. I'd have got through the queue that much quicker." And when I flew out to Poland, I was in yet another queue that was even more dense, leaving the country, let alone when I arrived in Poland. That was a monumental queue, because you are chucked over to just one or two people that will look at your passport. All of those privileges that we had as being part of the EU is very obvious when you travel. Yeah,
and of course what coronavirus has done, and with the timing, has meant that most of us haven't travelled, actually, in the post-Brexit period, have we? Because we were locked down for much of it, and we didn't go abroad. Many of us didn't go abroad last year, so we haven't actually had the acid test of passport control. And the nightmare in airports is not entirely caused by Brexit, but it's exacerbated and largely contributed to. But yeah, people are going to realise what it means to have prioritised the colour of a passport over its power, aren't they?
And certainly when we get through, we're very interested to see the public reaction when we get through this summer holiday season, because there's going to be chaos anyway. I mean, I go to airports every couple of weeks. It's really, really bad. It's the worst I've ever seen. When we get to the summer holidays, people are really going to see this for what it is.
Well, we shall see,
chaos.
and we'll have a ringside seat, and people like you can help the rest of us find out what is going on. And perhaps you're a canary down the coal mine on that one. I flew to Ireland at the weekend, but I think that there's still a common travel area there, so you don't have I know that there is, so you're still treated, you still have special treatment. There's no impact upon leaving the European Union on travel between Ireland and England. So I haven't yet had an insight on it, but I'm off to Greece next month, and I'll be able to report back on that. Thank you, Rob. Sarah writes, James Farage was on BBC last night yapping on about how it's not working because the government haven't gone far enough. He wants to influence backbenchers to push for more Brexit. This is the current narrative, and it's obviously BS. Also, the BBC shouldn't give the frog-faced muppet a platform, but they continue to do so. Mate, Sarah, Robbie Gibb is on the board at the BBC now. I'm afraid that the citadel has fallen, and the Brexiters who bleat about impartiality and bias whenever people tell the truth are now in the box seat. It's 24 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and as promised, he's not. Okay, we will catch up with Simon Sporrell to talk about cheese shortly. A different Simon, actually, my mistake. This one's in Weston-super-Mare. Simon, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just listening about, the dam breaking. I really, really hope so. I've got lots of friends here.
It's spurting, Simon. It's not necessarily breaking, but it's spurting.
Okay, so I've got lots of friends in business here, and I was astounded that they voted to leave. But basically, they wanted, more control in our laws. That was their argument. But from my perspective, I was a staunch Remainer, and I employ 30 people in Western importing goods from Europe, okay?
Right,
So we sell hair care products, okay?
Okay, yeah.
So my experience has been that in the 3 years or whatever it was leading up to it, it costs us so much money because, the ERG say, for instance, were going to let us fall off the edge. So we had to bring in, lots and lots of products so that everything didn't get stuck at the port. So we did that 3 times, which drove me mad. And in the end, I got to the stage where I thought, oh, sod it, let's go. Let's just leave so that we can get on with business. I just want people out there to understand.
What, leave England?
No.
Oh, I see. Sorry, yeah. Let's just get out of the EU so we know what the new status quo is going to look like.
Let's just get on with it so we can plan, right?
Yes.
So since then, people should understand that if we bring in things from, say, Holland and Italy, sometimes it's 2 weeks and sometimes it's 5 weeks, because now you've got to have countries of origin for, the cap, the bottle, the whatever it is. And it just takes so much time. Sorry, not so much time. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 5 weeks.
What was it before?
Oh, I could bring things in from Holland in 5 days. I could get things from Northern Italy in 10, 14 days.
Okay.
It obviously takes a lot longer now. And, of course, all the transport costs are through the roof. And, what people like MOG and the ERG don't understand is, we can do business with people from all over the world, but they can't change geography.
No.
And it's just been so.
It's the gravity
stressful.
theory of trade, isn't it? It took me a while to get my head around what that actually meant.
Yeah,
but
let's bring it in from Australia at the prices of fuel at the moment.
I know. You gravitate towards trading partners who are physically closest to you. I mean, it is as obvious as the nose on your face, Simon. But here we are.
Because it's cheaper.
Clearly, I know.
And honestly, when I listen to them, I'm just so glad about Tiverton. When you think about today at Tiverton, and I have written to John Penrose, which I've never done before, all about this. He's a good guy, actually.
I'll take your word for it.
And he resigned from, and voted to get rid of Johnson.
He did.
And I wrote to him and I said, look, John, sorry, it's too late. You had your chance. Why didn't they see that they should have waited for the confidence vote till after today?
Get you flipping Nostradamus.
Well, so they could have got rid of him, couldn't they? Then.
Yeah, I think oddly, you need to have orchestration, and everyone talked at the time about how this wasn't an orchestrated move because there wasn't a natural alliance. You had ERG people who were submitting letters of no confidence, and you had sane people as well. You had sensible people as well. There was no actual operation in place. If there had been, they probably would have been able to organise it so that people held off submitting their letters until after these 2 by-elections. But as soon as that threshold is breached, then the 1922 have to call the vote of confidence. So that's the problem. It's not John Penrose's fault or anybody else's fault, because there was no organised assault upon the office. There was no organised assault upon Boris Johnson. It was lots of disparate and very different MPs from the same party citing their loss of confidence for very different and disparate reasons. I think you probably know that already, but you're being a tiny bit unfair on John Penrose.
No, John, what I'm saying is I think the backbenchers are too late.
No, I know that. I do too. They missed a massive opportunity, but it couldn't have unfolded any differently unless there was an organisation in place. I am James O'Brien. That's not something I'm confused about, by the way. I was just glancing at the clock and deciding whether or not we were going to take a guest next, and I still don't know, actually. So the time now is 12:30. Here's Amelia Cox with the very latest news headlines. It is 12:33 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we take something of a departure from the programme proper now, because today is the 19th anniversary of the killing of 6 Royal Military Police servicemen, and there has been a service of remembrance while we've been on air at Gujarat Barracks in Colchester, and I thought, given the anniversary and given the importance of the service, that we'd spend a little time with a couple of chaps very close to the story. We'll begin with Staff Sergeant Clint Breeden, who has just finished attending that service, which he helped to organise. And perhaps you could just avail my listeners of the details of this tragedy. I said killings; they were murders, really.
They were indeed, mate, and nice to speak to you, James. And it's good that you want to take time to sort of help remember the guys that laid down their lives in 2003. Because for a lot of young soldiers now, they're born in the early 2000s, and those it's modern history for people like us. For them, it's they're quite detracted from it.
Yes.
So it's we'll say thank you for putting it back out there. In terms of what actually sort of happened in the summary, the guys, 6 of them, were sent on a patrol to a local Iraqi police station, and they were to go and deal with some ID cards and infrastructure building type stuff. And concurrently to them, the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment had an incident which resulted in an angry mob advancing through the town of Midr al-Kabir. Unfortunately, the Parachute Regiment managed to get out. Unfortunately, there was no communications between them and the military police guys. Unfortunately, the mob found the police station and 6 uniformed soldiers, and an incident ensued where the guys paid the ultimate sacrifice in serving their country.
What does a service like today do for those of you who are still serving? What sort of, I suppose I'm wondering what sort of feelings it generates.
So for people in my age group in the army there, we're probably the last generation, if you like, the peer group that are serving. A lot of us are coming towards the end of our full colour service. So for us, it's still as raw as it was 19 years ago, but we have to continue ensuring that our youngsters understand the history and their core history, their heritage, and through obviously myself and George creating what they did in the Memorial Garden in Gujarat Barracks, we've brought that right up to all of the youngsters, so they have a visual representation of people that have paid that price, and that we can come together, every year, or twice a year if you include Remembrance in November, to speak their names and remember the guys, and because a lot of us, I joined the army with Ben Hyde, so we were at Winchester train station together before going into training. So for me, 1 minute he's there and then he's not.
Would you like to speak their names now?
Yeah, so you have Sergeant Hamilton Gill, his nickname was H-Day, Corporal Russ Ashton, Corporal Paul Long, Corporal Cy Miller, Lance Corporal Benjamin Hyde, and Lance Corporal Tom Keyes. And
as you say, Ben Hyde was someone you signed up with. Any loss is tragic, and losses in these sort of circumstances especially so, because it was so bloody and so brutal. But when you have a personal connection with one of the fallen, that must stay with you in a different way, Clint.
So, yeah, of course. And I think for me, my father's in the army, he's still serving. So I grew up around incidents happening through, the late 80s and the early 90s, be it Northern Ireland or my dad's friends in Bosnia. So, I knew what I was getting into when I signed up. However, as a young man of 21, and we're privileged to be given results of coroner's inquests, etc. At 21 year old, you're a very, very young man, and you suddenly realise the severity of what can happen. And as an individual, in my current 21-year career, I've served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Bosnia. I've worked in counter-terrorism in London. The thing that has stuck with me has been what happened to Ben and the guys. And I've been in the privileged position where I've served at 156 Provost Company in every rank that I've served in the army. So for me, the company that we serve in and Ben is very deeply personal. I'm very, very connected to.
I should add, there's a book, isn't there, which tells the whole story, a book by Mark Nichol, Last Round, The Red Caps, the Paras and the Battle of Majar, which details, in forensic detail, exactly what went on and what unfolded. Thank you, Clint. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Clint Breeden. And any time you want any help bringing stuff like this to wider attention, you only have to ask.
Super, thank you.
We'll speak now to a pal of mine, actually, former Colour Sergeant George White, who was asked in 2020 if he could move the remembrance wall that was in the rear of the garden at Gujarat Barracks to the front of the garden. And George, when you got there, I think your response to what you found was a little bit more emotional than you were expecting.
Yeah, good afternoon, James. Yeah, absolutely that. It was all overgrown. 18 years have passed. And I just thought, I've got to do something here and step in and rally some people together to help me to do it. I'm going to go to my local building suppliers, Travis Perkins, etc., and just ask for their help.
And you put in a shift. So tell us what it looks like today.
Oh, well, the wall got removed. the weeds and the bushes were removed, shingles put down, 2 brand new walls at the front and the side elevation, and it still wasn't looking correct. So I asked someone else to help me out with finance, and he donated some money for some paving, Indian Yorkstone, and we repaved the whole square.
And it not only serves as a memorial and a commemoration, but also as a place where comrades, colleagues, and presumably even family members can take a moment to remember their lost loved ones.
Yes, exactly that. So now the garden is used where it wasn't being used before. So the guys who work here, they can have their lunch breaks here, sit in the garden and remember. It's a beautiful setting.
A service like today, George, finally, for someone who served like you did, and, you know, every time you go on tour, you know that you may not come back. How do you feel when you attend a service like the memorial you attended just earlier this morning? Well,
we had a fantastic bugler today, and when you hear that, it gets the hairs on the back of your neck. I look at the names and everything. You know, I served in Iraq. I met, Sergeant Hampton Jewell, and it just gets you. It gets you. It never goes away. But to be part of this lovely garden for the next generation of soldiers to come through is, it would be a pleasure for me to be asked to do it in the first place.
Fantastic. Thank you, George. Former Colour Sergeant George White there, and before that, Staff Sergeant Clint Breeden, who'd both been attending that special memorial service to mark the 19th anniversary of the Battle of Majar, as it's become known, where 6 RMP, 6 Royal Military Police, lost their lives. Their names once again: Sergeant Simon Hamilton Jewell, Corporal Russ Aston, Lance Corporal Benjamin Hyde, Corporal Paul Long, Corporal Simon Miller, and Lance Corporal Thomas Keyes. It's 12:41. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. George and Clint, they're speaking to us live from the Gujarat barracks in Colchester, as I mentioned earlier. Back to the business in hand, and the growing sense that Brexit is beginning to wobble. But I, of course, am only human. I know it's going to happen, and I wish it would hurry up and happen so that we could get on with the business of fixing all the problems that we've caused. But you can't fix problems while you're still in denial about the existence of the problem. So possibly I'm being over-optimistic. I don't know. John's in Brighton. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having us. I just want to reiterate your comments to the lads, the RMPs that lost their lives. I was in Almafana at the time. Brexit, going back to Brexit, it's good to see how many younger generations of callers you seem to have on today.
Yes.
Very indicative of the problem in that when the vote went through, millions of younger people below voting age weren't able to vote on their futures, whilst the Daily Mail reading retired people did take their futures away from them. And a classic example of that, I used to be a ski instructor in France, something that my son's not going to be able to do.
Gosh.
And I'm presently I'm an airline pilot with European licenses. I'm speaking to you from the side of the road. I'm driving boxes for £10 an hour because I can't do my job because of the complexities of the red tape of Brexit that nobody knew about. All your airline delays people are going through at the airports, so much of that is associated with Brexit.
So you'd rather be flying. You'd rather be flying, but you can't because your licenses were previously applicable across the whole of the European Union, and we're not in the European Union anymore. Is it that simple? Have I understood you correctly?
That is correct. There is a caveat to that. There was a window of opportunity of converting your licenses. I missed that window through no fault of my own.
Sure.
But yeah, basically, a highly qualified airline pilot. I can't even get a work visa to work in Europe anymore because European companies aren't issuing them to Brits. So here I am, hugely qualified, and I'm driving boxes around instead.
Oh, well, I mean, that must be driving you potty. Insane. That must be driving you absolutely potty. And then every time you open a newspaper or turn on your radio, we're talking about shortages, including of crews, in the airline industry. Yeah,
and this is to somebody who was born on my original passport, a European citizen.
Of course.
I think the sooner, God, I say it, Lib Dems or Labour, as soon as they put Brexit to the front of the equation, forget slating Boris Johnson and trying to trip the government up on all the things they're doing wrong, and just say to the public, we need to go back to Brexit and have another referendum on this. I think if any leading party says that in the newspaper tomorrow, they'd be voted into power.
Oh, I don't know that you're right. I mean, I think back to the first caller on this one from Wolverhampton, who is pretty adamant that a lot of his colleagues down in that industrial heartland in the Black Country, their friends and colleagues, they're just not ready yet or not fully aware of the relationship that you've just outlined between what we'd loosely describe as the bad stuff and the Brexit. People can see the bad stuff, but they don't yet perhaps fully appreciate how much of it is a consequence of the Brexit.
But I think James, that could be the headline point for anybody. I've not met any Brexiteer who can tell me what they have gained. But every Remainer.
Hang on a minute. What about those fish fingers that Jacob Rees-Mogg was talking about earlier?
Yeah, can he justify why dried pasta from Italy is 50% more expensive than it was a couple of years ago?
No.
Something to do with the queues at Dover, probably?
Well, the import of everything has gone up. I've got a regular correspondent who's a pal of mine who's a greengrocer, and of course everything's gone up because there are now checks that weren't there before, and even if there aren't any tariffs, it costs more money and delays and stuff goes off quicker. I hope things turn around for... What is the light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, the loophole's closed. Is there anything you can do to get back into a cockpit?
Yeah, Michael O'Leary, actually. He's the only one that's talking any sense, and Ryanair still offer opportunities for European licence holders, thank goodness.
Well, good luck.
He's the only one.
Chocks away, hey John. Chocks away.
Cheers.
Look after yourself. It's 12:45. It is 12:48, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A bit of a departure now. I can't remember which idiot it was, that one of the Telegraph writers, I think, who accused me of hating all things conservative, which is as patronising as it is thick and wrong. But it does sometimes occur to me to remind everybody what conservative parties looked like before the coup, before they were taken over by law-breaking liars, Lebedev's lying, law-breaking lapdog, and before people like Dominic Cummings were able to completely corrupt public discourse in this country. And my Full Disclosure podcast series has been quite a nice place to do that, although not much recently. I think Ken Clarke and Rory Stewart were guests before the sort of 2019 general election in that series. But it's harder these days to find people who perhaps are able to speak. We've had a couple of MPs booked, but they've mysteriously pulled out as the recording day got closer because they won't be allowed to do it. Even if they've gone public with their criticisms, they're still subject to the whip. But Chris Patten, or Baron Patten as he is now, has published his diaries from when he was governor of Hong Kong. They are brilliant. I mean, it's a historical document, but it's like his whole political career, really. It's imbued with his very strong values, his very strong Christian values. He's a Catholic, and unapologetically so. And his family were a key part, particularly of his work in Hong Kong as governor. You'll famously remember him shedding a tear or two as the yacht pulled out of the harbour. And his lockdown project was to turn about 800,000 words of personal diary, into about 250,000 words of publishable material. Andrew had him on earlier this week, Andrew Marr, and he certainly wasn't pulling his punches. My interview's a slightly more contemplative exercise because I had a whole hour to spend with him, and here is just a little taste.
But while I completed the interviews and hoped that I'd get in for the following autumn, I should do something, and I applied for a job in politics, for working for the Conservative Research Department before the run-up to the 1966 election. And as it happened, I got into the BBC, but I'd enjoyed the politics so much that I told the BBC I didn't want to work for them, which all my friends thought showed that I was completely insane. I'd gone out with my present wife when I was at Oxford, and we weren't married at that time, but she thought I must be lunatic to do this. I mean, I hardly had a friend who wasn't sort of, even if weren't very active, middle of the road Labour or left.
Well, where did your politics come from then?
I think scepticism.
Of?
Well, I've always been sceptical about simple solutions to things. So my favourite conservative philosophers have always been people who says, well, there isn't such a thing called conservatism in a sense of set dogmas. It's an attitude. It's an approach to life. and I think that's true. It's rather a sort of Burkean way of looking at things. Institutions are important. Checks and balances are important. It's important to try to be efficient and tolerant and generous. But the idea that there's a sort of schema which you can roll out and put in place. I mean, I was reading about some geek who's very important in Downing Street at the moment, who sort of polices conservative ideology. Actually, polices whether or not you can drive wedges.
Yes.
But I just wonder what he thinks that conservatism is. The ideology that embraces, Rwanda, Northern Ireland Protocol, and all the works. I mean, it's madness.
There's no ideology at all, is there?
No, there isn't. Well, there is. There's a sort of, as I've said before, there's a if it's an ideology to say you've got to always appease the right-wing Brexiteers and the Conservative Party, then there is one. But that's about all there is, I think. And I think it's a terrible mistake to be populist without being popular.
A terrible mistake to be populist without being popular. I mean, it's not great to be populist and popular, but that little phrase there, a bon mot from Chris Patten, who of course was a senior minister under Margaret Thatcher, responsible for bringing the poll tax, would you believe, to the British people. We talk about that in the interview. And then the mastermind behind John Major's unexpected election victory in 1992, although that's when he lost his own seat. So, listen, I'm not labouring the point, but I am very conscious of young people growing up now who think that Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg represent conservatism, which has a long and many think proud tradition in this country. The idea of the 2019 intake of Conservative MPs somehow being the heirs to Churchill, or it doesn't, or to Rab Butler. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about. So I'm keen, if I can and when I can, to cast back to bygone days when conservative wasn't a dirty word. There are some people who thought it always was. There are some people who still don't. But that's why I found that hour with Chris Patten quite moving, oddly, would you believe? And I think Chris is speaking at the Chalk Valley Literary Festival this very afternoon, according to Jim. It's an interesting book. It's an important book. But he is also a very interesting and important man. 12:55 is the time. Back to Brexit. It's been a bit of a hodgepodge this hour because I was very keen to speak to George and Clint about that memorial service over in Colchester. So I think I may allow myself another Brexit phone in at some point next week. But let's mop up the current one. Rob's in Hebden Bridge. Rob, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just sort of intrigued by the difference in the turnout in both elections. I know that you rather poo-pooed somebody earlier who said about the very low turnout in Wakefield at 39.1%.
No, I don't set too much. I never poo-poo anybody, Rob, or I try not to. But you can't make a direct comparison between a by-election and a general election is not very helpful. That's all.
There were two by-elections yesterday.
There were.
The one in Honiton and Tiverton, which I believe had a turnout of about 61%, whereas in Wakefield, which had traditionally been a Labour constituency up until the last election, the turnout was well below that at 39.1%.
It was 52 in Tiverton and Honiton.
Was it? I thought it was 61.
But anyway, it was just shy of 40 in Wakefield.
I just think one of the things that we're rather missing when we talk about, not only by elections, but all elections, is increasing number of people who, for one reason or another, are abstaining. And I think you've got a lot of Tory voters or previous Tory voters who won't vote for the Tories under Johnson. But I also think that one thing that's being missed, and I think this is part of Starmer's failing, is that there are a number of Labour voters who won't vote for him because they feel betrayed by him on the grounds that he'd stood for the leadership election on the unity
Well, I am going to very politely poo-poo you here, if you don't mind.
Go on, then.
Okay. It's the Chalk Valley History Festival, I should stress, not the Chalk Valley Literary Festival. We've had a very frenzied phone call, apparently, asking that we correct that. So I mean, it's not your job to do this stuff, it's mine. So you did get your numbers wrong on the original comparison, which may have slightly shaken your conviction. So the Wakefield turnout was 39.1.
Yeah.
If you look at the most recent by-elections that we've had in recent years, starting with Birmingham and Erdington, that was 27%.
Yeah.
Southend West was 24%. North Shropshire, when Owen Patterson's seat came up for grabs, that was 46, so 7% more than Wakefield. Bexley was 34. Batley and Spen was 47.5. That was high. And again, the Chesham and Amersham one was very high at 52. But Airdrie was less than Wakefield at 34. So it's not a particularly low turnout, and the overall result was better than Labour were expecting.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I don't know. It just seems to me. I mean,
I agree with you. Starmer's got an awful lot of work to do, but I don't know that the Wakefield result is the curate's egg that you are describing it. I think that's a pretty solid result for Labour, and it is the second time in 25 years that they've taken a seat from the Tories in a by-election. But yeah, I mean, the broader question of whether or not he is going to find the gear that many feel he currently lacks is one that we will be returning to in the coming months and quite possibly years. I'm so glad, writes Alice in Northwich, that you've picked up on Chris Patten. Thank you. I do. That's it, actually. There you go. No, there's a little advert there for full disclosure. Alice, you're welcome. Here's Sheila Fogarty.
I'm so glad it's not just me that ends up looking at text sometimes and going,
should read
I think she's left a verb out.
That's exactly what happened.
Thank you very much, James. Yeah, that was interesting. I'll certainly look that one up. 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 Was interesting.